It's time to take a look at your money here on Good Morning Quad Cities. And first, let's get a look at the weekly stock market recap. The S&P 500 down 0.7%. The NASDAQ, no movement since last week. And the Dow Jones Industrial Average down 1.3%. September was a tough month for investors. And joining us to talk more about this is our financial expert, Mark Ravicheski from our Quad Cities Investment Group. Good morning.
Good morning to you. Happy Monday. Good to see you again.
Happy Monday. You don't have great news for us when we're talking about September, because there was a pretty big sell-off. What was that about?
Yeah, remember, for much of this year, we've seen this gradual rebound in the stock market on the hope that, maybe this inflation problem was behind us. And that meant, David, that, maybe the Federal Reserve wouldn't have to be as aggressive in raising interest rates, and that maybe, perhaps, the Federal Reserve would actually start lowering interest rates. But over the past few months, we're getting more and more economic data that indicates that this high inflation is becoming embedded within the economy. So this higher for longer inflation means the Federal Reserve will likely have to keep interest rates higher for longer. And the longer we have high inflation, the longer we have high interest rates, the greater the risk the U.S. economy dips back into a recession. And all of that anxiety and uncertainty is being reflected here in the stock market, David. Again, during September, the S&P 500 fell nearly 5%. The tech-heavy NASDAQ, wow, nearly 6%. Dow Jones Industrial Average fared a little bit better, David, but still down 3.5% for the month of September.
So what does this mean for those who maybe have their investments in, some of these stocks?
This is a market that's going to require patience. And I know, like you just mentioned, investors have kind of been beat up in the stock market, for almost 2 years now. But it all comes back down to these three issues, David. When does inflation get back down to that target rate of just 2%? When does the Federal Reserve stop raising interest rates and actually start lowering interest rates? And finally, can we avoid a recession? And until Wall Street gets some level of comfort on these three issues, I think the stock market is going to remain quite volatile and choppy. I know it's not what investors want to hear.
It's not what anybody wants to hear. And so that kind of wanes on consumer confidence. And there was that new report out about consumer confidence. What can you show us about that?
You're right. Latest consumer confidence report released on Tuesday. The Consumer Confidence Index has a benchmark of 100, David. Any index level above 100 indicates a level of optimism by consumers on jobs, on income, the state of the economy. Likewise, any level below 100 conveys a pessimism. In September, David, the Consumer Confidence Index was reported at 103. So remember, with a benchmark of 100, at 103, consumers are confident, but just barely. Now, the Consumer Confidence Index is made up of two components: short-term optimism and longer-term optimism. In other words, 6 months out. As we can see here, in the short term, consumers are still quite optimistic. But again, it plummets for longer-term expectations. And again, high inflation, high interest rates, very cloudy, uncertain outlook for the U.S. economy has created a much more pessimistic longer-term outlook for the American consumer.
Yikes, not a lot of hope for the future in a lot of people's minds. And that kind of brings us to something recent. Government was facing that shutdown. They passed it in the 11th hour, but only for a month. Do you see that playing a role in consumer optimism at all?
In my opinion, David, I think this shutdown impacts very few people, not to discount those people, those government workers and employees that are impacted. In my opinion, David, the next big hurdle for the American consumer is the November-December retail holiday shopping season, which is literally less than 30 days away. Do consumers feel enough confidence in light of all of this uncertainty to really open up their wallets this holiday shopping season?
All right, Mark, thank you so much for expertise. We'll have to wait and see how that all turns out.